What comes to mind when you hear the word storm? Maybe you picture a light rain shower that hampers your plans to go to the beach with your friends and family. Or perhaps something more powerful, such as a hurricane, with torrential rainfall that can flood streets within a few minutes, fierce winds capable of tearing buildings apart bit by bit, and power supplies for entire cities knocked out for many days on end. It is the unfortunate reality that such storms do occur across the world and leave behind a lasting impact. There are some storms, however, that bring with them the same damaging events at a tenfold magnitude, leaving behind trails of destruction and cementing themselves in meteorological history, serving as a grim reminder that Mother Nature can attack with fury. In North America, from June 1st to November 30th, weather stations are on heightened alert and are on the lookout for formations of tropical storms and hurricanes. Using technology such as advanced computer models and data from previous years, meteorologists and other weather experts will try to extrapolate a system's path as accurately as possible and formulate appropriate plans of action. Depending on the size and danger these systems present, plans of action can range from something as minimal as ordering workers to stay home for the time being to something more extreme like enacting mass evacuations. But what causes these storms to become so dangerous in the first place? The answer lies within their formation. During the hot summer months, the sun shines directly above the waters at a latitude of 5 to 20 degrees north and south. Direct sunlight heats the surface of the oceans to the point of evaporation, creating warm, moist air that rises to the atmosphere. It is worth mentioning that many of the hurricanes that form near North America are the result of trade winds that travel from east to west across the tropical Atlantic towards the U.S., where the waters are warm. As the system continues to move towards the tropics, warm air from the ocean rises into the atmosphere, and at a certain altitude, the air begins to cool down, and the water vapor condenses into liquid droplets, forming clouds. This is the beginning of the first stage of hurricane formation, the tropical disturbance. When the water vapor condenses, heat is released into the air, and that hot air rises and gets pulled into the cloud formation. The cycle of evaporation and condensation continues to fuel the cloud columns. Meanwhile, a moving column of air begins to circulate, forming a cluster of thunderstorm clouds. As this thunderstorm grows higher, the air at the very top of the cloud column becomes cool and unstable. As the cooling water vapor releases heat, the air at the top of the clouds become warmer, increasing air pressure and causing winds to move outward. The air near the ocean surface moves towards the area of low pressure, rises, and creates more thunderstorm clouds. The winds in the storm cloud column begin to move in a circular motion, and if the speed reaches between 25 to 38 miles per hour, the storm system has reached the second stage of development, called the tropical depression. If the wind speeds exceed that range, it reaches the third stage, the tropical storm. At this point, the winds begin to twist around the calm center of the storm, known as the eye. Due to a phenomenon called the Colorless effect, which is the pattern of deflection taken by aerial objects as they travel long distances across the planet, the wind direction for storms in the northern hemisphere moves west to east, or counterclockwise. This is also the point when the storm is given a name. If the wind speed exceeds 74 miles per hour, the storm is officially classified as a hurricane. The winds and the low air pressure system cause ocean water to pile up near the eye of the hurricane, resulting in storm surges that sweep across the mainland. At this final stage of development, the hurricane is assigned a number from 1 to 5 based on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale. Their destructive capabilities range from minimal damage to buildings and uprooting of foliage to absolute destruction and chaos that leave behind almost nothing except for a grim reminder of Mother Nature's fury. But as cut and dry as hurricane development seems, we must remember that nature always has exceptions. Some storms cannot be characterized by a single category, and for a long time, scientists have entertained the idea that some could become more powerful than those we have witnessed in the past and present. With rising global temperatures, it may not be so preposterous to believe that a Category 6 or even a 7 hurricane is possible, and therefore should be added to the scale. A very select few have entertained the idea of a hypercane, a hypothetical storm system characterized by wind speeds of over 500 miles per hour, and the result of extraordinarily hot waters, up to 50 degrees Celsius, although this is almost impossible given today's climate. While it may seem silly to talk about something that has never occurred, and hopefully never will, the point still stands. Not one storm is the same as the other. Think about all the notable hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones, and other storm systems that have occurred in the world. What cemented their place in meteorological history? Many of us would answer this question with a high death toll, millions, perhaps billions of dollars in damages, the ability of a nation to recover from disaster. There is one storm that gained its infamy for a particularly different reason. Instead of gaining notoriety for its results, it did so because of its inception. The 1991 nor'easter, more commonly referred to as the perfect storm. On October 28, 1991, a high-pressure system marked by a strong cold front was traveling west to east through New England and most of Canada. Just ahead of the high-pressure system, an area of low pressure was developing and intensifying near the Canadian province of Nova Scotia. The result was a massive pressure gradient, which was so great that the intensity of the winds began to pick up. What happened next would best be described as adding fuel to an already large fire. One day before these two fronts collided, Hurricane Grace was traveling towards the island of Bermuda when an extratropical storm north of the hurricane diverted it in an easterly direction. Using the best computer models available then, the National Weather Service predicted Hurricane Grace would collide with a high-pressure cold front and continue in a northeasterly direction. But this would not be the case. Rather than continuing on its projected path, the low-pressure system instead stalled on Sable Island, located around 200 miles off the coast of Nova Scotia. The combination of warm, moist air provided by Hurricane Grace from the east and the cold dryness of the high-pressure system from the west resulted in the low-pressure system growing to a colossal size of over 1,500 miles in diameter, dwarfing all storm systems in previous years. As if the storm size was not enough, it began to do something else that amplified its danger. Instead of moving forward from west to east, it moved backwards towards the North American continent, to unknowing beachgoers and mariners. Unlike most hurricanes which travel along the east coast from a southerly direction, this storm was traveling towards the coast from the northeast, a characteristic of another type of storm called the nor'easter, which almost always brings precipitation in the form of heavy rain or snow, rough seas, and rough winds. This nor'easter reached its maximum intensity on October 30th, with a barometric pressure of 972 millibars. The resulting pressure differences created some of the largest waves and strongest winds ever recorded, with meteorological instruments reporting sustained winds ranging from 50 to 70 miles per hour. Ocean wave heights were recorded at almost 40 feet, with some of the largest being reported at 100 feet by a buoy located south of Halifax, the capital of Nova Scotia. On the 1st of November, the nor'easter weakened into a tropical storm shortly before escalating into an unnamed Category 1 hurricane due to the presence of a warm core center. One day later, on November 2nd, the storm fully dissipated after crossing Prince Edward Island. In a conversation with author Sebastian Junger, Bob Case, a meteorologist who worked in the Boston office of the National Weather Service, stated the October storm was the result of 3 different phenomena that all combined to create what he referred to as the perfect situation. Warm air from a low-pressure system coming from one direction, cool and dry air from a high-pressure system coming from another direction, and tropical moisture provided by a tropical storm or hurricane. In 1997, Junger wrote a book about the event titled The Perfect Storm, which covered several elements of the event, such as the broader impact of the storm, the efforts of the United States military, and its efforts to protect their people, and last, but most importantly, the tragic story of the fishing vessel Andrea Gale. Junger used the story of the Andrea Gale as a vehicle to express the unpredictability of nature and the emotional toll such disasters leave behind. In the year 2000, a film adaptation of the book was made, and despite receiving mixed reviews regarding its accuracy, it further expressed the dangers of maritime work and travel. But what happened to the Andrea Gale to garner such widespread attention? The Andrea Gale was a 72-foot-long fishing vessel that set out from her home port of Gloucester, Massachusetts, on September 20th, 1991, towards the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, a body of water rich in many species of fish, such as cod, haddock, and swordfish, the latter of which the Andrea Gale was after. But when the catch was less than satisfactory, its captain, Frank William Tyne, known by his nickname Billy, redirected the vessel towards the Flemish Cap, an area of shallow water about 350 miles east of St. John's, the capital of Newfoundland and Labrador. He hoped to obtain more sizable catches, despite sailing into an area with less than ideal conditions and parts of their ship not working, including the ice machine, a tool necessary to keep their catch as fresh as possible. On October 26th, Tyne and his crew, Michael Bugsy Moran, Dale Murph Murphy, Alfred Pierre, Robert Bobby Shatford, and David Sully Sullivan, set course for the Flemish Cap. But what these men could not have predicted was that they were sailing to their demise. On October 28th, Linda Greenlaw, the captain of the fishing vessel Hannah Bowden, received a transmission from the Andrea Gale. During this fateful call, Tyne related to Greenlaw that the weather conditions were torrential, with waves reaching as high as 100 feet and wind gusts reaching up to 90 miles per hour. Tyne's final words on the call were, "She's coming on, boys, and she's coming on strong." On October 30th, the Andrea Gale was reported overdue, resulting in an extensive air and land search, which included the New York Air National Guard, the United States Navy, the United States Coast Guard, and the Canadian Coast Guard, covering a combined total of almost 200,000 square miles, sadly to no avail. On November 6th, the Andrea Gale's emergency position indicating radio beacon, a device used to send an emergency distress signal when in direct contact with water, washed up on the shores of Sable Island, the same island where the low-pressure system stalled and absorbed Hurricane Grace. Despite its discovery, The Canadian Coast Guard could not confidently determine whether it was manually turned on or kept off, and therefore could not determine if the crew members could put out a distress signal. Aside from other debris such as an empty life raft and a fuel tank speculated to have belonged to the Andrea Gale, there was no sign of the vessel or its crew. On November 9th, authorities called off the search and rescue mission. The vessel was never recovered, and all 6 crew members were presumed lost at sea and deceased. While the film version of Junger's book portrays the cause of the fishermen's deaths as being attributed to being swept away by massive waves, the truth is that we have no idea what happened during the time between Captain Tyne's final transmission and the time they were supposed to have arrived back home. Most people agree that the Andrea Gale capsized due to the force of the winds or their massive waves, rendering the crew unable to escape and succumbing to the storm's fury. Others believe a massive rogue wave almost 100 feet tall crashed into the fishing vessel and destroyed it and the crew almost instantly. Whatever the case may be, we can only hope that their last moments alive were quick and painless. Given the impact of Junger's book and its subsequent film adaptation, the tragic story of the Andrea Gale is often synonymous with the perfect storm. But we must not overlook the valiant efforts made by the United States Air Force and the Coast Guard, whose servicemen and women go out of their way to rescue those caught in a dangerous situation, often putting themselves in harm's way. In the United States Air Force, there is a particular type of Special Operations Force called Pararescue Jumpers, or PJs for short, whose tasks often involved personnel recovery, combat search and rescue missions, and provisions of medical treatments and evacuations, but only after going through some of the most intense physical training of their lives. Their extreme dedication to saving lives is emphasized by their motto that goes, "These things we do, that others may live." This couldn't be any more true for the 5-man crew aboard Air Force Rescue 110. On October 30th, a civilian sailboat that was caught in the middle of the perfect storm sent an emergency distress signal from about 250 miles from the New Jersey coast. Late afternoon on the same day, 5 men were tasked with this sailor's safe return. Major David Ravola, the pilot, Captain Graham Bashore, the co-pilot, Staff Sergeant Jim Mioli, the flight engineer, and Technical Sergeants John Spillane and Rick Smith, both of whom are pararescue jumpers. Because the stranded sailor was so far away, only a military helicopter, such as the Sikorsky H-60, would be capable of this mission. But this rescue mission was made all the more difficult due to the extremely turbulent conditions. Throughout its hour-long travel, the helicopter had to have 2 mid-air refuelings from a C-130 tanker plane to maintain flight. The plan upon arrival was for Spillane and Smith to jump into the water, rescue the sailor, and attach themselves to a cable, and Mioli would be responsible for hoisting the men on board the helicopter. Sadly, upon arriving at the stranded sailor's location, weather conditions deteriorated as the waves reached incredible heights and the wind speeds accelerated. The waves and the winds were likely strong enough to snap the cable, and if it were to be wrapped around a body part, it would be strong enough to amputate it. As a result, the crew reached a disheartening conclusion. The rescue was too dangerous for both parties, and the sailor would have to be rescued by boat. The C-130 tanker dropped some survival equipment to the sailor, and Air Force Rescue 110 began to head its way home. While flying his men back home, Rivola was attempting to refuel when the helicopter flew against a 75-knot headwind. Despite multiple attempts over 1.5 hours, the C-130 sustained weather damage and was forced to abandon the helicopter, leaving it with only 20 minutes of fuel. It was at this point that Rivola made the fateful decision to abandon the helicopter. After lowering the helicopter as much as possible while avoiding the waves, Rivola ordered his men to bail out. Smith, Spillane, and Bouchard jumped out, but Mioli was frozen in fear and could not bring himself to jump. Unaware of Mioli's presence, Rivola flew the helicopter away from the rest of the crew as far as possible to avoid crashing it on top of his men and killing them. The helicopter eventually runs out of fuel and crashes into the ocean, with Rivola and Mioli still inside. Mioli would immediately get sucked out of the helicopter, while Rivola had to escape through an exit. Eventually, Rivola surfaces and finds Mioli, who did not put on his survival suit during the preparation for the bailout. As a result, his body temperature began to plummet rapidly and was reaching hypothermia very quickly. A couple of hours later, Spillane floated towards Mioli and Rivola and clung onto them for support. As it turns out, instead of jumping onto the crest of a wave, Spillane most likely hit the trough of a wave and did so in a horizontal position instead of a vertical one. For context, jumping from a high altitude and hitting the trough of a wave is similar to landing on concrete. In Spillane's case, the position he was in as he hit the water, plus the altitude at which he did so, resulted in some horrific injuries, such as broken bones and ribs, a ruptured kidney, a bruised pancreas, and burst blood vessels in his eyes. The trio would continue to float aimlessly in the ocean, surrounded by darkness and bombarded with rain and fierce winds, until hours later, when a rescue helicopter found the men and attempted to rescue them, similar to how the original crew was planning to save the sailor. However, given the further deterioration of weather conditions, the helicopter was unable to rescue them. It seemed to be the end. The rescuemen who needed rescuing themselves were going to die. But an hour later, they spotted the lights of a Coast Guard ship called the Tamaroa, which received Rivola's Mayday signal before the crash, and eventually made its way towards them. The crew on board the Tamaroa located Bouchard first before finding Rivola, Mioli, and Spillane. All 4 rescuemen would make full recoveries, and the sailor they attempted to save was picked up by a freighter the next day. Tragically, despite a 9-day search by the Coast Guard, Rick Smith was never found and was presumed deceased. Time and time again, we have observed that nature works in ways we don't quite understand. Despite living in a time where we have a more concrete understanding of most natural processes, technologies whose capabilities seem to outperform their predecessors with each passing year, and centuries of previously documented research that allows current scientists to make more accurate statements about the world. But as we have observed, there are rare exceptions when nature decides to challenge our standards of science. Despite computer models predicting the low-pressure front to continue its trajectory, it instead stalled, reabsorbed an old hurricane, and produced a cyclone the world had never seen. No one expected this storm to form in such a way, and that in and of itself is equally dangerous as a storm. Who is to say that such deadly events would not happen again? With rising temperatures across the world, we cannot sit back and pretend the natural dangers we face today will not get worse. As previously mentioned, the idea of expanding our current storm indices may seem silly to most people. But if such an event were to occur again, or perhaps something even more powerful and unprecedented, it would certainly not be a laughing matter. Given the rate at which our current climate is changing, only time will tell whether or not we are truly prepared for what is to come. At the time of writing this episode, Hurricane Helene wreaked havoc across many cities in North Carolina, a state whose infrastructure is not well equipped to handle hurricanes. On October 6, 2024, 3 hurricanes named Milton, Leslie, and Kirk formed in the Atlantic Ocean at the same time. This was the first time that 3 hurricanes ever formed simultaneously. If this is the current trend such events are following, who knows what lies ahead in the future? And more importantly, will we be ready?